Morning,
Okay, we're
everyone.
live.
So, Gabor, I'll lead the meeting since you wanted to
Sure.
see my meeting super running powers or whatever they are. I'm not sure I have any. But anyway, welcome everyone to today's EU Criticals call. We're going to go around the group of us, tell everyone what we've been doing, and then talk about any blockers we have. Being as I'm running the meeting and Gabor always starts with me, I'm going to start with him.
Sure. No problem. So, I've actually been on an RSI break for the first 3 days of the week, and I feel a bit better. Thank you. So I just got back yesterday, tried to catch up with some of the criticals that we spawned last week. However, we've been to the Acquia office last week. We had build week, an on-site week with engineers, and we basically worked every day and night on getting stuff done. So I've got a lot of things in. We got the security release done, but I guess that was all discussed last week. So what I left on Friday is several side issues from the update path testing, which I'll paste a link soon if nobody beats me to it, which found several problems with config schemas that have since been fixed, which I've reviewed and found some problems with and submitted follow-ups, and also found an issue with indexes on content. I just pasted the main issue there. And only one of the follow-ups is currently critical, which is when an index is added for a content translation UID, the corresponding stored schema definition is not updated, which I think is getting close to being done. So yesterday I've been playing catch up and reviewing these and trying to help get change notices out of the way and issue summaries updated and patches being applied, etc. And we'll get back on those issues as soon as I can. That's it for me.
Thanks, Gabor. So, Platch, have you got us a summary of what you've been up to?
Sure. So basically, the last week I was busy with fixing the automatic automatic entity update issue. Let me find the ticket. And yes, luckily it was finally committed a couple of days ago. So one less, and here is the link, which is number 2542748. And so, well, I'm working on a small follow-up for some non-critical points Fulgencia came up with. But aside from that, I'm just picking new stuff right now. Actually, I think I earned just now a brand new critical. There's one, a security-related one in the content translation module queue, which is named Content Translation Module Information Disclosure by Insufficient Access Checking. This is the link, and number is 2558905. And then I was planning to review again the issue mentioned by Garbo earlier. When index is added for content translation UID, the corresponding stored schema definition is not updated, which is 2555665. Very easy. And I agree that one should be pretty close to completion. The main issue I have with it is that I still don't understand what is actually triggering it. So I wanted to have some manual testing to actually figure out what's happening, but I think it's looking good, and it's probably going to be committed very soon. I think probably in a couple of days maximum. And then the last news is that I asked a new grant, new D8 Accelerate grant, spanning for the next 4 weeks 15 hours a week, and if that's awarded, then I will be available to work on any critical issue popping up, at least in my area of expertise, and the main focus will be bugs related to the 8 upgrade path. And that's all for me.
Thanks, Batch. Wim, what have you got for us?
So I've been continuing to review mostly safe markup issues, and that has been moving forward still very well, down to the last few now. Those are proving to be more tricky, of course, but that's to be expected. Besides that one, I also reviewed the criticals around disabled text formats and that causing potential security problems in the way it was handled in Drupal 8. Those are fixed as well. And what I've been mostly working on is Smart Cache, because Alex Bronstein at Fulgencia, as of a few days ago, has bumped in the comment that I just pasted. That's comment 324 on the Smart Cache issue. He has just bumped that to critical because that is providing significant savings and therefore qualifies as critical. But to avoid that the discussion becomes very, very hard to follow, he opened a separate issue to discuss the pros and cons of shipping with it now rather than later, having it be opt-in versus opt-out. And so there's a lot of interesting discussion happening in that issue, which is a pure discussion about consequences issue, if you will. And that's issue 2556889. And thanks to that discussion, interesting things have been brought forward. Two of the most interesting aspects are that so it's mostly about security considerations, really. So Smart Cache, in some respects, makes it easier to introduce security problems. And the idea is, and that was brought forward in that issue so far, is to introduce decorators for certain services that allow us to automatically associate the necessary cache contacts, the ones that are especially security sensitive, and therefore mitigate any security problems either completely or for, say, the 98% case. So I've been working on that, and so trying to unblock that as much as possible, keep that moving forward as much as possible, to address the security concerns there as much as possible, as soon as possible, so that the discussion can continue to move forward there. And that's it for me.
Thanks, Wim. Sasha?
Yes, I've been working on some upgrade issues. Looks like most of our remaining criticals are somehow related to upgrade paths, or the majority of it. Trying to fix some tests, doing reviews and so on. And it turns out that you can have a surprising number of bugs and weird stuff in update tests and think that they are working when they really are not doing much at all. But we think we're slowly getting to the point where we can actually run them for real, but there has been some discussions in that one of the latest issues there, which is about removing the cache clear and module install. So we have upgrade tests that before running updates install modules and clear cache based on the new code, and that doesn't really make sense. And we're trying to get those tests to pass without having to clear the cache first, but running into routing problems with unserialization and links that are generated and so on. So we're trying to get those tests to pass, working on that a bit. And there is some discussion in there about changing our dumps and instead only provide test coverage from beta 14 forward. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not. Maybe that's something we should discuss. Other than that, I've been looking a bit at Smart Cache and the discussions around it. Have been trying to help it with running contrib tests against Smart Cache, and I'm currently also updating our install profile so I can try and test some more cache there. That's it from me.
Thanks, Sasha. Catch.
Yeah, so yeah, been doing lots of reviews as usual. Tried to keep up with the safe markup issues as well as I could. A few of those are going in. We've just bumped some of the child issues of the critical issue to critical and demoted the critical meta issue to major, so it's more obvious what's really left there. I'm just catching up with exactly what's critical and not as the call's going on. What else? Was looking at the upgrade path, the new upgrade path critical, which I opened yesterday, which was what Sasha was just talking about, that we flush all caches and do router rebuilds and install modules before we run updates in the update tests. And that only got exposed because I realised that we were hiding notices as a result of doing that in the update test base class. Looks like there was some work on that overnight that I haven't fully caught up with, so I'm going to catch up on the last couple of patches there. And then the other thing mainly has been looking at the smart cache, mainly the meta discussion about that, to try and assuage security concerns. I think that's promising. I'm not sure where it's going to end up, but it's been like a useful discussion at least. That's all I can remember today.
Thanks, Catch. Hey, Gibran.
Hi. So not a lot of work on criticals, but I have reviewed some earlier this week which got committed, and I have been mostly working on majors to find the upgrade path issues with their upgrades. So nothing else to report here. That's it from me.
Thanks, Gibran. XJM?
So I've spent most of the past couple of weeks working on the safe markup issues. We closed out all the removals of core usage of safe markup set this week. Going forward, I'll be working on the recently promoted critical children of the formerly critical plan, and also have filed a related major issue regarding the exclamation point placeholder for safe markup format and for T. Currently, there's a behavior where if you use the exclamation point formatter, you're basically escaping that your string is going to be, guaranteeing that your string is going to be escaped, which is probably the opposite of what the developer expects. And we're recommending that instead of doing that, we just simply run an XSS filter on the string if it's not already escaped, so that it mostly behaves like developers expect. We still go forward with also removing the unnecessary uses of that placeholder in core, but it won't be critical. So the parts of that issue that are critical are removing safe markup set, removing safe markup check plain, and removing safe markup escape. Sorry, deprecating safe markup check plain and removing safe markup escape. And we'll discuss whether or not we want to remove check plain entirely based on how that goes later. I'm also going to be working on some documentation about how to use these APIs properly in Drupal 8 in order to help ease the transition and get the change records up to date so that they're actually useful for people. That's probably it for me.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, for myself for the past week, it has been pretty much all safe markup. So I don't think it's worth repeating what Jess has just said. But
great. Thanks for the filing of by duplicate. That was great. Okay.
And just pointing out that we've already got an issue with work on for the.
Why didn't you put it on the plan? I just spent an hour, whatever.
Anyway, so it's been all safe markup, and I've been trying to keep up with reviews and keep the RDBC queue moving, but I've been kind of failing at that because it's now well over a page again. But that's it for me, really. It's just safe markup, safe markup, safe markup. But eventually, we will have less of it. So does anyone have any issues that they want to discuss?
I'd like to talk about the upgrade path.
Yeah, and if there's time at the very end, I would like to have a brief discussion about the concept of what Alex Bronstein proposed in the smart cache security mitigation stuff, which is essentially have a separate module that contains the safeguards, and that allows you to, if you really want to, and going forward to Drupal 9, to disable that safeguards module, which would be hidden, and to then see the failures that occur because of that. So that would be interesting to discuss later if we have time. Upgrade path matters more right now, I think.
Is there anything apart from that we want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we've done enough talking about safe markup, and we know where we're going, and we've swapped a few things around and got everything critical there. So I don't think there's much to discuss. And I think the only other set of criticals remaining are all upgrade path, right? Or related.
Yeah, we've got the security issues, but they're straightforward bugs. They're not. I don't think we need to talk about them.
Cool. So let's talk upgrade path.
Right. So the real brutal emulsion install issue. With that one, the problem we have is that we made a change to the router, and then that causes notices when the router is rebuilt or anything is done with it before that update runs. And the patch that made that change hacked update test space to hide those notices, although it only hides them on MySQL because it's a slightly different error on Postgres, which is why Postgres has been failing for a few weeks. So when you remove, and the reason why it hides them is because it hides the notices on update.p. No, it hides the test-only notices from the rebuild of the router, but then once the router is rebuilt, it actually works again. So then when it runs the update tests, the router is already okay and doesn't need to be updated, and all of the notices in head that you get when you update manually, they start showing. So it's hiding two sets of notices, one by kind of like suppressing them, and one by kind of pre-updating the router before the update runs. So the broken update path that we actually have doesn't get to run as it normally would. I think there's two issues. One is that update path doesn't work at the moment. It doesn't work right in head, and the head upgrade path is broken. But that's, and then the other issue is that the upgrade tests are completely lying to us about how they work, because it's completely different to actually running an update. One thing I suggested in there, which I think we should talk about, is basically update in our update tests, updating from a later database dump than when that menu patch went in, and then that would let us fix the upgrade path test base to do things properly, because it wouldn't run into the issue from that specific update. And then we'll have an issue again when we do any changes like that, but they'll start throwing errors in the update test properly, and we should never ever hide errors like that ever again. The problem with that though is that we've got a lot of implicit testing from that month or so of updates that were added that we would lose if we do that. So the other way to do it is to actually try and fix all of the issues with update.php and routing, probably in this issue, because I don't think we can split it up, which I know Daniel started working on more properly than I did. But I'm not, yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure which one we should do, because we're kind of adding a lot. There's a lot of problems in this one issue, like at least two separate issues that are currently stuck in together. So it'd be interesting to see what people think about that.
It's tempting to move the DB to a later beta and then not have the issue, because we said that we were trying to support the upgrade path from beta 12 rather than definitely supporting it. So that does seem tempting, but it does mean that how does head-to-head cope with it? or just head-to-head do the same thing as the upgrade path test space and somehow force people to run a cache clear and a route rebuild before actually running the upgrade path? And does that work?
I think like last night Alex Bronstein said he tried to do it manually, and the last time he tried, if he removed like the files PHP folder and cleared caches and a couple other things, then he could run it. I haven't tried to like brute force that update yet. I think like in theory you can do that.
So maybe if there's a workaround and the fixing will take longer, then it's acceptable to move it.
But I think the issue, I'm not that worried about the head-to-head updates. I'm more worried about, like, we would never have found this issue if we hadn't got this. Like, our upgrade tests were broken, and the only thing that exposed it was these tests failing on Postgres. And there are other updates in there, which if we stop running, we're going to also miss other critical upgrade path bugs. So we would need to examine what those updates are doing and decide whether we need to replace them, and that could also be a lot of work. It would make this actual issue would be much easier to fix because we could get update.php and the upgrade tests to a point, and they would just work because they wouldn't have to deal with this thing. Yeah. Sasha, you had thoughts on this, did you want to?
Yes, so first I can confirm that I've updated beta 8 to 13, and you can clear caches and even install a module and then do the upgrade path. So that works at least up until beta 13. So there is a workaround for those sites that works. And I'm not sure about the tests. As you said, it would mean we would remove quite a bit of test coverage that we already have for those existing update functions. And so what we did in the past, like in the Drupal 6 to 7 update or something, then we had those hard-coded functions directly in update.php. We just do the initial steps to at least be able to run update PHP itself. Would it somehow be possible, at least for now, to fix this issue, to add back something like this? Just for our hard-coded routing problem that we know of, that's not...
I had thought about that, because we've got the fun controller now, so before we do anything, we could check the schema version of core, and if it's lower than that menu update, we could run the menu update directly, and then let the update continue. Before we render anything on update.php. I mean, that would be almost exactly like the Drupal 6 to 7 prepare bootstrap thingy. We could do that, and then we could in release candidate remove that again, and say that you have to go from beta, whatever the last beta is, first before you go to the first release candidate, so that you get that run, and then you go past it. But we could remove the hack from update.php in for the first release candidate. That seems very feasible to me.
Sorry, I thought about this before Catch proposed this last idea, but I just wanted to check with you. And what if we went the easy way in the issue, and once that's fixed, we open a new critical, trying to go back to the beta 13 or 12, I didn't get the exact number, and if that's the last open critical, we can discuss whether it's worth trying to do that or just demoting it or not fixing it.
So you mean update the database dump and then open a new one to go backwards with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also an interesting idea, because that would at least let us fix this without trying to fix like 4 issues at once. I think though that Sasha's idea might be easier than an updated database dump, because they're quite a lot of work, especially now we want content in, and they actually take quite a lot of work to make. So I'd like to try prepare Drupal 8 to 8 update, whatever we're going to call it, as a one-off, just to get that just to see if that'll get us past it.
I agree that would be if that works, then it would be the easiest way out for now, and a lot less work probably than updating the update dumps, yes, database dumps.
That sounds like we've got some consensus there. So for people to file a plan on the issue and do.
Well, I think we need to open another issue about, because when we moved to a controller, we thought we were moving the routing dependency, and of course we're not at all, because there's so many routing dependencies on update.php. So we should open another issue for that, because there's Daniel's patch to mock the route generator and things, and then we can decide on that later. But splitting that out would be great, I think. Let's just give it a go.
Cool. So are there any other upgrade issues to discuss? It kind of amuses me that keeping Postgres around has kind of saved our chickens with the upgrade path. And the Postgres testing has revealed it.
Yeah, that's always those side effects.
So,
sorry, one quick question. Can I just double check the last failures on that issue? Is that because the update tests are installed in modules and we removed that and now those modules need to be installed? Is that right? No answer. Okay, that's fine. I'll ask an RC later.
So shall we move on to Smart Cache, which Wim also wanted to talk about?
Only if there's nothing else left to discuss, because I'm sure that like there's a lot of discussion happening already there. So if anything else. Sounds like there really is nothing else to discuss. If we really are down to those two last clusters of issues, safe markup and upgrade path, maybe that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. So, in a nutshell, the security concerns around Smart Cache are: what if a certain important cache context is missing that then causes information disclosure? Because that's really the kind of security problem we're talking about. If something is cached for Alex and I get to see it, then I get to see Alex's home address or something. Like, that is not something we want Drupal to be doing by accidental mistakes in the code. So what actually is problematic here are three cache contexts that are missing, or that could be missing if a certain route plus controller should be varying by it but does not specify that cache context. And those three are user permissions, in case permissions are being used but you forgot to specify the cache context. User, in case there's user-specific stuff, like, for example, somebody's address. And then finally, node access, so the hook node grants system. Now, user permissions, that's mitigated by the fact that several weeks ago, maybe by now months ago, we added user.permissions, which is a cache context, as a required cache context. So that means that anything that is rendered is automatically varied by user permissions, which means that anything can, like, there is no possibility for something to be incorrectly varying, insufficiently varying by that cache context. So that's a non-concern anymore. But we cannot do the same for example, the user cache context, because that would mean that every single thing in Drupal would be varied per user, and that would effectively cause cacheability to become very, very poor, which would flood our servers with enormous amounts of cache items and so on, so it would effectively make caching completely useless. So there we need to have a smarter approach, and the same goes for node access. Several places use node access whenever you're listing nodes, for example. Those queries are tagged with a node access query tag, and then the necessary changes are made to ensure that only the nodes that actually are visible to or are accessible for a certain user are actually shown. And so node access and user are the tricky ones. The interesting thing there, I think that Alex and somebody else brought that up as potential solutions, is we can decorate those services, and for the URL issue, some time ago, 2 months ago, we made it so that whenever you generate a URL and you are rendering something, we added a method in order to allow us to know whether something is being rendered. And if that's the case, if something is being rendered, we specify the right cacheability metadata and bubble it automatically. And the beauty is that the same mechanism that was introduced there can be used here as well for both node access, and that is already a green patch and is working very well, as well as the per user stuff. And the per user stuff there, we are thinking to, whenever we access something that is actually user specific on the current user service, so for example the email, the name, the ID, because usually when you're loading profile data, like for example somebody's address, that you will need to access by first loading the user entity, because the current user actually is just the account information, nothing more. And so we can do those kinds of things, but I'm wondering if people think if there are then still remaining gaps, like do we still see problems that aren't yet addressed then? Do we still see potential for some cache contexts missing?
So I think if you've got like custom modules that are doing like their own weird access things, then those would be affected, like something by IP, for example. So you have access by IP, then that's going to need those cache contexts. But also, those are going to be affected for node and block caching and everything else. So I'm not sure it's that much of an extra issue for those kind of like weird case modules. I feel like the node access approach should fix that quite well. I'm less confident about the current account decorator. It just feels more fragile to me.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm not sure it's really, like, I would like to understand why you say it's fragile. I would say it's actually too aggressive almost, like it is assuming that in any case any of those things are accessed, that is going to be rendered, and therefore we are bubbling that cacheability metadata even when it maybe is not necessary.
So there's two bits of that. One is that, so that's kind of the opposite of fragile, I guess brittle. And then the other one is that, say you add configurable fields onto the user, are we going to automatically do all of those as well?
So that is actually answered by the fact that the current user service is not actually, like, it's a bad name because it's not a user, it's an account. So you actually have to access the current user's ID to load the user entity, because only on the user entity you can access those custom fields. And so in that way, I think that's addressed, unless I'm missing something.
So the only way to get the full user entity is to access the ID, and when you access the ID, we add the cache context.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. Then the other thing with this is something like tracker, where the UID is an argument. It's not going to help with those issues. I mean, they should be adding at their like access callbacks and things, but that's
right.
going to be helped by the current user service.
Right, so basically when the current user entity is injected through a route parameter, automatically upcasted and so on and so on, that's the use case you are worried about then, or that's our main.
No, not really. So Drupal.org, you've got tracker, and then you've got tracker 35733, whatever. And then if you're an admin, you can go to any of those pages. And if you're a regular user, you can't. You can only go to your own. But another module that does something like that, it would be easy for them to end up showing exactly the same user data on all of those pages. And that's not a current user issue, that's the different pages showing the same information. Because the current user it's only implicit, but the link generation might be to different pages, but the actual page itself is going to be different, but it could show the same information. No, it can't. Yeah. Does that make sense? I'm getting lost.
I kind of get what you're saying, I think, but it sounds like you're thinking about it both ways. The way I was thinking, which is the URL contains an argument that points to a certain user, and it may be a different user than the current one. So that could cause a missing user cache context, but I think you're saying also, that wasn't entirely clear to me, that perhaps it is always using the current user cache, the current user service, even when a different user ID is specified. And so because it didn't specify the user cache context, you could cause pollution, as in my posts could start showing up for yours because you accessed, because of the way caching would work. If I would have accessed your tracker page first, the current user would have been me, so my posts are cached for you, and when you access it, you get to see my posts. That's the second direction you were talking about, I think.
Yeah, but I think then that second direction would be covered by the current user service. So
yes.
It comes down to the user. It's only the user ID in the URL.
Yeah.
So I guess most of those cases where you have admin access, then that's based on a permission. So I think most of those cases are covered because of the required user permissions cache context.
Mm-hmm.
So normal users will always have a different permission hash than admins that have that admin see all something data permission. So I don't think that's too likely to happen.
Yeah, I think that's probably true as well, but it still nibbles at me a bit. I'm not sure I have a concrete way that it would happen yet.
But are there other scenarios that anybody can think of that are still problematic beyond the ones already brought up? Besides additional cache context defined by custom code or contrib code, which we obviously cannot protect for. But that is always going to be a relatively advanced use case, and I think that it is pretty fair to say, well, if you're adding custom cache contexts and you're doing, therefore, pretty advanced things, we do expect you to also be aware and specify the correct cacheability. I think we mostly want to protect common use cases, relatively simple custom modules extending from core. You're just building upon what core provides, right?
I think the only question would be, would we want to allow custom or contrib modules to always add additional cache context to the required ones, which I think we already do allow them to do that.
It's a container parameter, so you on a site or even in a service provider, you could alter it and add something in there.
Yeah. So we can just document. It might be good to document that in that discussion, but very clearly that you can also do that.
And that's actually the second aspect I wanted to bring up. So Alex Bronstein posted a very interesting comment on the issue that was split off from the policy issue. And this one is specifically about automatically ensuring the node access grants cache context is present whenever it should be present. And so what he was saying there is, what if we provide a separate module. Let's call it cache context safeguards, for example, that is enabled by default, that I propose would be hidden, though he didn't say that, but it sounds too scary and strange for an end user to actually have to deal with that, so I think it should be hidden. In any case, what it would do is it would contain all of those wrapping things. So it would contain the URL generator that does the bubbling, that wraps the non-bubbling, the regular, if you will, URL generator. It would contain this node access cache context bubbling thing that would also wrap the existing node grant storage, and so on. And so that makes it very self-contained, and it would also contain the user permissions would make it a required cache context thing that would also be contained there, so that all of the let's protect developers against the common mistakes in Drupal 8.0. That would make all of that self-contained, and would then provide also useful examples for these other modules defining additional cache contexts to look at.
I don't really like that idea because it's too easy to miss installing that module, especially in install profile. So there are some existing install profiles out there already, mine for example, and then I would just update core, then I wouldn't notice that and would have to remember to manually add that new module to the list of modules being installed. So if nothing else depends on it, then it would be easy to forget on custom install profiles, for example. I think making it configurable sounds interesting, but we can do a lot of that through overridden service definitions or settings, something like this.
That's exactly what. So I posted a proof of concept patch that does exactly that. But that's an interesting point of view.
Could we make the module required and hidden, and add an update to the system to update it, to install it even?
Or can we display a status report item if that module is not enabled? I don't know, a warning, maybe something that can be disabled via configuration or something like that.
Those are all very interesting points. Getch, what do you think about what Birdier was saying about install profiles that already exist?
I think if it's required and there's a system update in to enable it, then you can't miss it.
Right. Okay, so do we overall feel that that's a good approach given the necessary special considerations like making it required, having a system update end so that install profiles that already exist do get it as well, potentially a status report entry, like with those special care items, do we then feel like that's a good approach overall to isolate those safeguards into a separate module to make it clear?
I had one question. You mentioned the URL generator, but I felt like that was, rather than a safeguard, like a workaround, because we don't have a nice way of doing it. Whereas node access we do have a nice way of doing it that's easy to forget.
Right. Yeah, that sounds sensible.
If it's a required module, or then, so the idea I think was to be able to disable it if you don't want it, but if it's a required module, how do you disable it?
That's a good question.
Look, system info to if we've still got it.
Yeah, the idea is that we would maybe, like in Drupal 8 point something, or definitely in Drupal 9, we would no longer have it required. And as Ketch just said, you can still get around it for those sites that do want to make sure that everything is done correctly for their site. It allows us to see how much the safeguards are saving us, essentially.
So one thing is that some of those safeguards we might want to have disabled by default in our tests. For example, the node access one. I think that shouldn't be enabled by default in our tests, because then we can see if it's missing in our tests, kind of, if we remember to have test coverage for it. But some of those other things as well. But as Ketch said, the link generate, that's not going to be possible to disable because we rely on it. There is no other way often to do it.
Yep, that makes sense.
Even if it's a separate required module, we would still want parts of it to be still separately configurable for the tests to be able to disable it. I'm not fully convinced that module idea makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, we could. If all it's doing is defining some services, then I know it sounds stupid, but we could have another module that you enable that's optional and hidden that undoes all of the things that safeguard module does. So that they're
No
both
safeguards, please, module.
yeah, like that.
Services, then you can also just provide a services.no safeguards YAML file that you can just enable, and then you have the same.
Right, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. It's much simpler.
I'm not sure it's a good idea, but it's...
Yeah, it's better than the alternative. Okay, I'll try to summarize these things on the issue. This was really helpful, thanks.
So does anyone have anything else that they would like to discuss? Or should we get back to work, get all these criticals done, and get Drupal 8 out? And party.
Sounds like a plan.
It does sound like a plan. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming today. I think we had a good discussion, and it's good to see that now the criticals, all we have left is safe markup and upgrade path. So we know what we need to do.
Sorry for the late intrusion. My mic was not working. I have this issue which we discussed last week. Add an API to update reliable run data after. Add an API for data values updates to reliably run after data format updates. So, are we going to promote this to critical or not, or what is the decision? Because Wim asked a question 2 days ago and there is no response. So I would like to discuss it before we wrap up.
Sure, that makes sense. Catch, what do you feel on that issue?
I'm not sure. I feel like we're going to end up needing both of the extra CSH update issues. But every time we think we need them again, we find a workaround. I think the issue that you're talking about is which one is it?
The views change, the cacheability plugin.
Yeah. So what I wondered with that issue, the problem is that we have to load the views to get the cacheability data to save them. And after last week's discussion on that, I had wondered if we could do a similar update to the block context one, where with the config API, we remove the key that's invalid in one update function, and then we add a separate update function which loads and saves. Which would mean that if anything else was doing stuff to views, it could insert itself in between. So it's exactly the same as the block cache context update.
Just for the record, that block pattern doesn't work at all. It's impossible to use. I tried.
Is that because we messed up the patch, or because the whole idea was bad? I thought we just...
Because we messed up the patch. Because we don't store enough data to be able, as a contrib module, to have an update hook running to fix it.
Yeah, but if we had got the patch right, I mean, really, we should have had a test for the contrib module. Like, we should have done that.
Apparently, we should have, yes.
Yeah. But if we had done that, it would have worked, right? Conceptually, it was okay.
It should, yes.
Yeah. So I think if that works for the views issue, we could do that and not promote the other one for critical, but it's just punting off like the inevitable situation where we can't do that anymore, and I don't know. I'm really ambivalent. I mean, on one hand, I'd like to get it done, but it is like there's a lot of documentation and discussion about exactly what we're going to do in which issues, which having the extra hook makes clearer, but it's still going to be a lot of thinking. So I don't know about, I don't know. I'd be interested to see what other people think, like whether we should keep trying to muddle along with the one hook until we absolutely run into a brick wall, or whether we keep trying to do the maximum that we can within the limitation of having the one hook. Yeah, I don't know. Thoughts?
I feel like there's also the risk that I don't feel confident that even adding additional hooks for different phases is we're actually going to know that resolves our problem either, because the range of different problems that people can have is so broad. I don't think that adding a new API would necessarily make us any more confident that it would work than what we've already tried to do just having the one hook is my thought. So my inclination would be to fix all of the other extensive problems we still have with the upgrade path, extend the test coverage, and then because adding a hook is something that we can do even in a patch release. If it turns out that is critical, and there's some contrib module that we're totally screwing, we can fix that within a month. So my inclination would be to leave that issue aside for now.
So then do the kind of like the two-stage update in this issue to allow modules to inject themselves if they so desire, but break our own rules with what we say we're allowed to do during hook update end.
Yeah, well, I think we need to say that at the moment, that's how you do it. Like somewhere we need to document like this workaround and say that that's the way to do it, because we can't have, like, we have rules which I'm not even sure where they're documented for exact. I guess there's hook update in docs that say don't do this, but we can't update in docs that say don't do this, and then you go to system update and it's doing all the things you can't do because it's just not right. So we need to update the docs to say somehow try to explain this. Or I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's depressing.
At a minimum, I think there a long inline comment in the system update hooks is necessary, right? That explains why it's being done in this case, how it's being used, and then we can do an @C to the specific update hook at the end of the update.php documentation. So it's not in the main documentation. It's not something we're encouraging people to do, but then they can read the hook and actually understand the use case that we're attempting to support with that hook.
Yeah, I'm talking like in exceptional circumstances there are exceptions to these rules, and these update functions that have them, and to do here's these two issues which stop them being rule breakers or something. Yeah, I mean that would help. That would help me feel better about what the way that we're doing it. Yes, very exceptional. Except it's like every other one that we've got in cord, but yeah. But I mean, so let's. Like Giovanni, I think it would be good to try and have used if you try and the two different updates and see if that works. And then if it does work, then possibly keep going the way that we are. But yeah, I don't know. Like.
So I don't think it changes anything for that issue, because in one hook I have to delete the existing cache metadata, and in the next hook I have to read the config object again, and I have to load the views executable in that hook to generate the new cacheability metadata.
So Gibran, what you need to do is in the first hook, go around, find all the views that you need to update the config for by just removing the key, and in that remove it and store which ones you need to load and resave in the next hook. And in the next hook, you just load the view and resave it, and then it's done. You don't need to play with config in the second hook.
So in the second hook, I load it using Entity API.
Yes, because
and I save it using Entity API.
Yep. That's what we did in the block one, right?
Yeah, that's how the block one works.
Yep.
Just copy that.
So that would be a problem for the contrib module who are trying to update their cacheability metadata.
So
Wouldn't
it
it?
would, except what the contrib modules would have to do is implement hookup dependencies to run after the first one runs, or at least before the second one runs. So then when they do their update, it happens before the views are loaded and saved with the entity API. And then they could add another second hook that runs after the one that loads and saves the views that they need to do with the entity API. So it means all of the stuff without the entity API happens at the beginning, and all of the stuff with the entity API happens at the end. And it's really horrible.
That's not how the block update works.
Yeah, it's not how it works. That's just about to say the same thing.
Because, oh, hold on, well, wait, though. If they just need to update the cacheability metadata, it doesn't matter. Won't that work when we just load and we save, though? Because it's figured out anyway.
Yes, but if we had the next views update that's after that one, then it's going to do a schema change again, then the entity, saving the entity is going to break it.
Yeah, exactly. This is different from the block update. The block update actually never used the entity API.
It did at some point, but
not the version that went in.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah.
So yeah, we actually are not breaking our rules at the moment in head.
Yeah, so it is worse, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So why exactly do we need to recalculate the information? Don't we have the information more or less available, just in a different format? Because, for example, what we have is, so mostly we're changing from cacheable true-false to cache moxh, 0 or non-zero. So couldn't we just hard code that if it's cacheable false, then we set it to 0, and if it is, then we set it to, I don't know, unlimited for now, and then you have to maybe resave those views, or we just set all of them to uncacheable, and you have to resave the views to have them cacheable again to be safe.
So that's not ideal, I think. Go on, Wim, please.
What I wanted to say is, if you are using the cache plugin in Views, which allows you to specify time-based caching, then it would not be 0, it would be something like 300, like 5 minutes. And similarly, any contrib Views plugin may also specify a max age of several minutes instead of 0 or non-zero. So I agree with Gibran that it's non-ideal.
Yes, but the point, we have those 3 known cases. We have the only case I know in core that we have time-based caching is that cache plugin. And so we have 3 cases. We have cacheable false, then we set it to 0. We have that cache plugin, then we get the configuration directly out of it and set it. And otherwise we set it to unlimited. And then if a contrib module adds another time-based cache plugin, then it can just add a second update function after that and fix the views that use its plugin.
Yeah, I think you're right that that's a fair compromise for core, but isn't this a more generic problem we have to make sure that core contrib is able to do, or are we then just thinking too far ahead?
I think update functions aren't a place for generic solutions.
Right, but what I mean is, right now, this is a fair compromise, but once there are a lot of Views plugins, then it is not going to be acceptable to just have a heuristic to determine what the max age would be. You would actually want the correct one to be present, because it would, depending on your site, and the plugin significantly affects performance and cacheability.
Well, we are ignoring the basic problem here, which is that on the first place, why we want to run the update hook, because we want to update the cacheability metadata, and the static files, which are or the disk files, have the updated cacheability metadata because we have updated all of those, and then the installed one, which are in the config storage, they don't have the updated cacheability metadata because of what Purdy is suggesting, So this is the config mismatch, and I don't think the hook update is, achieving what it's supposed to be doing, and in that sense, we have to remove. It's a better idea to remove the update path altogether.
What do you mean? Have a BC break and not have an upgrade path for this?
Yeah, because the config will be outdated anyway, because max age value is not, somewhat something we can trust actually after the hook update, because the storage one and the disk one is different because of after the update hook.
Well, I don't see the problem. Then you just have to export your config again. If the staging folder, you just have to export again. Of course you have. That's true for all config changes in update functions or any other config change. I don't see a problem there. And the problem is, the real problem is default, export the default using modules in config install, because those are going to be broken. And it's going to be an API change for those. That's the real problem, not the staging folder.
So every time we have minor change in the cacheability metadata, we just have to, re-export all the views, right?
I don't think after running hook update, well, running update.php, you should trust an export taken from before it. Like that's not the same thing. I don't.
Yeah, it's
see why
definitely a different site after that process has been done. Maybe something that we should even add as a note, a recommendation in our update documentation is that, by the way, changing your site changes your site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically the rule should be whenever you run updates, you should always re-export all config.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me.
But so trying to get.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just trying to understand like Gibran's concerns. Like so that's dealing with the staged ones, like the ones that are in default. But the current update path doesn't read like the default views, does it? It just resaves the views because it says that whatever cacheability metadata is calculable from the code at this point is what we're going to accept. Correct, Gibran?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the default views are irrelevant to the discussion of what should be done in an upgrade path, because we've just got all the upgrade path has to be concerned with is how do I get the current active configuration that compatible with the code following update.php.
Yeah.
Right? And in this instance, we want to remove a config key and replace it with some values that need to be generated from the entity itself.
Yep.
So, and according to our rules, we can't fire hooks during the upgrade path. So getting it from the view is very hard because in order to create a view, even in just creating the view, and not using it even its ability to save itself, it will fire hooks because it fires hooks on creation.
Yep.
So the current method doesn't work. So then the suggestion is like, let's break it out into two: one where we just remove the invalid schema key, and one where we use views to fix it in some way. But that still has a problem in the fact that that's going to be calling entity hooks, which we're saying we shouldn't do. And as we've just looked at the blocks thing, we don't actually do it there. So this would be the first instance. So in order to do this with our rules, we can't, because we need to get the cacheability data from the views code, which is entity code. So we have two options here. One is to relax our rules to say that if you are going to do entity operations, do them in a hook update and hook that only does it by itself, or we do this late update where it's safe to where actually the code is in place and all you're doing is manipulating active objects like through the entity system. The problem with doing like the isolated hook update end solution which actually does entity operations, is that what happens when there's another update after it which does a schema change. That schema change would then be brought forward because it would be tried to fix by just the mere fact of saving the views through the entity system. So I think we have to do the late update issue.
I actually don't think so, because I just realized something. So what we're doing here really is we're doing two things. We're changing the API. So instead of specifying cacheable yes or no, a Boolean, we're specifying a max age. So we're bringing views in a state that is consistent with everything else in terms of APIs. And what we can do is we can remove the existing key that is renamed. That is something we don't need any special stuff for. And what then is actually the problem is we need to recalculate things. But we know which plugins are in fact affected by this. And this is exactly what contrib would have to do. If contrib, a views plugin in contrib changes its max age from 5 to 100, doesn't matter what the values are, then it has to look at all the view config objects, check if the display, check every display to see if the plugin in question is being used. If so, it can reliably say, or no, it can't, because there's also the interaction with other plugins. That's where it becomes problematic. Otherwise, we would just be able to not do the calculation, and we would just be able to say, okay, this plugin is being used here, so let's change the actual value to the new value.
Yeah.
But yeah, doesn't work. Never mind. My bad.
With the later update that changes the API again, on the block context issue, what we talked about was, so you have update 1 that does the safe thing, update 2 that does the dangerous thing, and then you have update 3 that conflicts with update 2. What you would do then is you would empty out update 2, have update 3, and then you would add update 4, which is a copy of update 2. And then within your own module, you've done it. You've got the same kind of precedence of updates where it's like schema first, entity second. And then any contrib modules that used to depend on update, like want to run, say, before update 2, would have to run before update 3 or 4. That again is horrible, but it's what we discussed on that issue as a way around later updates that interfere with the earlier ones. We could also just remove those 2 updates and implement a hook update last removed and require people to update sequentially.
Yeah.
But I mean, it gets worse and worse, you know.
Yep. And then there's the added advantage if we do add this late hook update in. Then we have solutions for things like the Twitter field module, which changed everything 5 times. Each time it could continue to use the field API to do that, rather than trying to work it out in hook update ends and gut some of them and do different things each time.
I'm still a bit confused because what Wim suggested is exactly what I said. Core just updates whatever we know, and then a country module can write its own update function, and we know how max age merging works.
No.
If there are 2 plugins that set a cache time, then the update code just has to look if mine is lower than the other one. If yes, update. If not, ignore it.
But how is it going to look at that? Like, it needs to look. So let's say a certain view, a certain display on a view uses 5 different plugins, and I, maintainer of a certain contrib module, I'm updating the max age of one of those 5 plugins. I know my max age, but how am I going to figure out what the max age is of every other plugin?
You don't, because it's stored in a single place. You just have to check if yours is lower than the one already stored, and if yes, you update it, and if not, you don't. And then all of those 5 updates would run, and one of them, it doesn't matter in which order, the lowest one will win. Because
But the other way around is also important. What if you initially, for cautionary reasons, you specified a very low max age, and then you realized, hey, I don't need this. Let's remove it. Let's make this permanently cacheable. How are you going to figure that out?
Exactly the same. If your value is stored in there, then you don't, right? But I'm not even sure that's the use case you are supposed. I had a discussion a while ago that you shouldn't update config unless you have a schema change. So if you change your default, then you should, in almost all cases, not update existing config.
Right.
Yep.
It's up to the individual site to decide whether or not it wants to import and implement that new change.
Note it in your change record and say, like, you probably want to update it because it's fine like this, but you should not change the values. You should only update your existing values to keep the schema intact and do no other changes.
Yep.
That's interesting. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, totally. Because they might have selected that value for reasons which are outside which they want the site to do.
Yeah, and that would cause a behavior change all of a sudden.
Yeah, which they won't know because it's happened in the middle of an update.
Yes.
And then their site behaves differently, and they're like paying like twice for their host where they before.
Well, that's also not entirely correct, though. Daniel, can you mute? That's also not entirely correct because I know I forgot my train of thought. Because of the rule that you should always re-export all of your config after updating. So you would actually see the differences caused by an update.
Maybe. If you're running a site and you're exporting your config and then you do a comparison to the previous and you're storing in Git, that's making a load of assumptions about how someone's running their site.
Yeah, that's true.
They might not have a test site. They might just be running it on a server installed through cPanel and Fantastico and.
But in that case, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that we don't have a way forward yet on this, and I don't think like staying online and talking some more is going to help.
One last point. So I think the bigger problem in that issue is the actual API change that you're making, and that we will break install default config. But what if we, at this point, decide to find a way to make it backwards compatible? So we keep the schema for the existing key. We somehow care about it, at least if it says false, and we just will let it over time update when those views are changed, because it's an API change, and we said we're not doing API changes anymore unless we have a critical reason to do so, and the problem is we don't.
That's a good point. And then if it was backwards compatible, then we wouldn't have to worry about the hookup down. That sounds eminently sensible, Sasha.
But it's still a problem that it's also going to appear in contrib, right?
Yeah, I still think that at some point we're going to end up doing the late hook update N. The question is, when do we have to do it? Now, before see, or can we do it when we've got real problems?
So is then the conclusion, do not load and resave these views entities, but just assume that whenever something was uncacheable before, you specify max age 0, otherwise you specify permanent. That sounds like a fair compromise to me.
So the compromise is actually make a backwards compatible change so that we don't have to do any hookup to N. So that if it says it's cacheable true, then don't change anything. If it says it's cacheable false, then make sure that applies, that you're not going to cache the view.
Right. So you're talking behavior remains the same, but the schema and config files do change, right?
No, it's backwards compatible. So you just leave the config files alone.
So we cannot specify max age inside of the views config files, is what you're saying.
Yeah, of course. You just keep the existing key, and for those views that still have the existing key, we respect it. And when you save the view, over time we drop it.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. That sounds really sensible to me. because it means that install profiles don't break. Currently, default config doesn't break, provided by modules, and we obey our rules, which is we don't break APIs for non-criticals.
Isn't it always also the case that we actually don't respect the cacheable flag at all? So we just add new properties like maxH and cache tags?
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying.
Well, we respect it what if it's there, but when you save the view again after this change, it will be removed.
Yes, for sure. Like we.
Unfortunately, Daniel, we're not hearing you. Also, we're 22 minutes over time on this call, so it's probably time to end it. Does anyone disagree with that? Hopefully not. Anyway, I'm going to end it. I'm going to thank everyone for being here. There was a discussion, and hopefully we can find a way forward without breaking the APIs on this views issue, because I think that's the way forward. Great idea, Sasha. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.